Welcome to Blackpill
Actually, wait, hold
Literature.
on.
We've got quite the episode today. Take two. All right, welcome to Blackpill Literature. So today we're going to be talking about one short story and then one novel and then another short story in the Blackpill context. So the first short story for today is actually The Raft by Stephen King. Stephen King has written many a good horror story, and he's actually, put together many a good protagonist. In terms of these are reprehensible people, very similar to the people that we'll be talking about in Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, and yet somehow you find yourself rooting for maybe at least one of them in a horrifying situation that they might get into. In this case, we have, in classic Stephen King setup fashion, four young people going into some out of the way place in the woods where there's a little lake that they could swim at. These four people are varying shades of reprehensible. I think one of the girls is more unlikable than the other girl. One of the guys, I think, is definitely more unlikable than the other guy, who is probably the most likable person out of the four. So you go from guy most likable to girl more likable, girl less likable, guy least likable. And here you go, you have this group of friends discovering a raft out on the waves. And they're looking out there, and spoilers, by the way, they're looking out there, and there's this cool raft out there, and they say, hey, let's go swim out to that raft. Like, why not? And here's the thing. They're fairly reprehensible people, and sort of in horror fashion, actually, they are presented as kind of deserving what they get in some minor sense, just for the sins of their behavior generally. So here are people where, at least except for the main boy character, they are all irresponsible, kind of unlikable, kind of mean, kind of nasty, and they're having sort of a little time at the beach, or at this little lake beach, and then they swim over to this raft kind of floating in the waves. And of course, in Stephen King fashion, they end up opening a door that is not easily closed. Now they're on the raft, and unfortunately, there is this like sort of pile of muck floating in the river water. And one of them sees it coming closer. It's not even really muck. Visually, it looks sort of like an oil slick of some sort of shiny, kind of, you can see different colors in it in the light. And so this is kind of slowly floating over towards their raft, and I think one of them notices it. In any case, cut to the chase, this thing starts eating them. And the second you touch this thing, basically, once it gets on your body, it fucking eats you. And so here were these teens, or, I think young 20 somethings or something, who were getting into some kind of romantic, rambunctious encounter in the woods, and now they are being caught prisoner on this horrible raft where, well, it's a nice raft. It's a nice sturdy raft, but it has the little openings between the boards, of course, and they're caught prisoner floating above the waves with a long enough swim back to shore that, as I think we find with one of them, you can swim as fast as you want, but you're likely not making it back to shore before this thing floats over and eats you too. And of course, Stephen King presents it as kind of horrifying. It could seem like a lamp monster story to the uninitiated, but to those who have read it, I think you find that it is filled out with enough detail where this thing killing these, basically these kids, is very horrific detail. Encounter of great magnitude. Anyway, it's a Blackpill story. It's a classic Blackpill story, and a good one to start with, because here are four people. They got into a situation that they sort of stumbled into. This is almost Kafkaesque, and they almost couldn't have known that this situation was waiting for them, but by the way they had acted in their lives and all ended up together in this kind of mean and little nasty group that they had, or at least varying shades of unlikable. Now they are in this horrifying situation where this unknowable predator lurks them in the darkness of their ever unlengthening reality, because their lives are coming to a close one by one and they're all stuck together with the most unpleasant people of their life. Life can suck something away from you, or at least it seems that way. And in Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, we see a man come back from war only to find his great love going around town with the other guys, and a really obnoxious crew of hipsters at that. But then also himself stocked with what seems like, though the book is vague enough that I didn't get it myself when reading it in college, that he has lost his ability specifically to have sex, and so she sort of hangs around him as a vegetarian boyfriend while he seethes. It's an incredible novel, especially for the black pill community. Beyond the obvious things you could wonder about it being propaganda for certain national narratives, as many books are, Stephen King started his career with Carrie, or at least became popular. A novel that begins with a gym teacher talking about the dangers of not teaching sex in school, in so many words, with her horror that Christian Carey wasn't taught what a period is, and his books are full of that. This book is not overtly political as I remember it, or even if it is a story of a man who basically becomes his own man as he slowly realizes the degradation of all the people around him. This video will have spoilers, so please read the book. It's great. But if you don't see yourself reading the relatively short, crisp novel that begins with his brutal takedown verbally of this guy who seems to himself be leading a black-pilled life, then fine, continue. We'll continue. Now, Jay-Z says moral victories is for minor league coaches. However, Jay-Z can't buy a moral victory with a single dollar he has. It's all about that. Jake Barnes walks around with Brett Ashley, Lady Brett Ashley, whom Brett Cooper was apparently named after, and all her friends, which is a group of irritating, annoying assholes who walk around Paris as if they're some kind of celebrities. It is like the movie Midnight in Paris. And like the movie Midnight in Paris, you're wont to receive many scenes of these characters sort of sitting around in a booth at a bar, or these characters drinking and maybe dancing here, or walking around this crowded scene of French socialites. And it's quite exciting. It actually comes off a little like reading Hemingway's own book, A Movable Feast, wherein he talks about going around Paris in a similar way, I think, with F. Scott Fitzgerald and his pretty horrendous wife, apparently, Zelda Fitzgerald. And yeah, Brett Ashley and Jake Barnes, perhaps that's somewhat representative of Zelda and F. Scott Fitzgerald. Perhaps not. I'm not saying that it is, but that would be an interesting connection. Although F. Scott seems to have more of a Hemingway attitude. Or rather, no. Well, no, F. Scott actually does not. Jake Barnes seems to have more of a Hemingway attitude towards what's going on than does F. Scott Fitzgerald seem in real life. And so if you read, for example, The Great Gatsby, and then you read The Sun Also Rises, it's basically the same story. It's, not to give many spoilers about The Great Gatsby, it's a man who is basically going through the local, in this case, sort of 1920s like New York society in America. And then in the Hemingway novel, The Sun Also Rises, it's a man who's going through the sort of 1920s Lost Generation Paris society. And I think the books were released around the same time. Maybe I'll put something in the in the video to say that or not. But in any case, these books written by sort of Titanic authors were titanic writers of their time, these books give you really no less than exactly the life that a black-pilled person in today's age might find themselves in, where they look around and they see that almost everybody around them is just a horrible fool, very stuck into some smug appraisal of basically everything around them, but also very stuck up in this smug, condescending attitude that rains down disgusting vibes like so many clouds over the scene wherever they go. And so these people are all around, and whether it's the people of The Great Gatsby, or in this book's case, the people of The Sun Also Rises, you just have endless people sort of hedonistically playing out their lives and kind of chattering about the local celebrities of whoever seems like the coolest guy at the party. And so here you have Jake Barnes giving really brutal assessments of things. For example, and I'm going to look this up, and this book should well be in the public domain, so, of course, this quote is reasonable to read. Okay, here we go. I'm sure we have this. Under the drink. I think under the drink is the exact quote. Here we go. How about they all seemed? They all seemed. How many times could it all seemed, they seemed to, they seemed, oh wait. Okay, how about this? Friendly people. Is that what it is? Friendly people? This might be it. Friendly, no. Okay, anyway. I suppose I didn't find the quote. Maybe we'll probably put the quote on the screen. Matt, you can have a fucking ball chopping the silent parts and just putting that to a reasonable format. Anyway, at one of the high points of the tension of the book, where, basically Jake Barnes is forced to watch his girlfriend go around with other guys and kind of, well, he's not forced to, but he's following her around, she's following him around, who knows what's happening. He watches her sort of speculate about other men and perhaps go around with other men, and he's sort of left in the dust because he has this injury from war or something where he's not going to be able to perform certain ways in the bedroom, or perhaps, something appears to not be functioning right. And so here he is, and he is saying, oh shit, as he watches basically the love of his life just sort of go around town and kind of be used by the local men. And whoever seems the most interesting, whoever seems the most passionate on a given night, that's whom Lady Brett Ashley is going after. And so here you have him sort of stretching out kind of an inverted scene to the sentiment from The Great Gatsby. I'll give the description that Nick Carraway gives, but I won't tell you when it was or what the context was. But Nick Carraway talked about people being careless, let's just say, and in a quite beautiful passage of The Great Gatsby as well. So, in sort of an inversion of that, here we have Jake Barnes kind of going around in a Nick Carraway fashion where he's kind of taking a back seat to everything and just basically following along, tagging along as he watches all these people live out their trendy lives. And he is drinking in this scene, and at a certain point, Hemingway writes something along the lines of, under the drink, whatever. Under the drink, like, things loosened up and I felt a lot better. And then blah, 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 blah. But then he sort of ends, I think, the point and even perhaps the chapter with, they all seemed like such nice people. They all seemed like such nice people. And he's referring to the people he's going around with, and it's one of the most brutal takedowns in all of literature, at least all of literature that I've read. And it seems like, how could it possibly be much more brutal than that? He's sarcastically writing essentially through the view of Jake Barn, through the views of. He's sarcastically writing, they all seemed like such nice people, when in actuality, they all seem like horrifically vacuous and careless and awful people who just go around destroying their own and each other's lives in a haze of just ugly drink. And so, here you go. And I'm doing this from memory of the book, but here you go. Towards the end of the book, from having read it a decent amount of time ago, probably around 10 years ago, last more than that actually. I think I may have only read this book once in full, but I love this book. It may still be my number one book of all time. And if The Great Gatsby is a beautiful, brutal takedown of modern society, modernist society, you might say, in the 1920s. Then, and modernism being a term to refer to sort of that time period, actually, or the works from that time period. So Hemingway is a modernist writer. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald is a modernist writer. As far as I know, they would be considered as such. They're also part of the lost generation. But here you go. In a similar way to how The Great Gatsby analyzes the lost generation in New York, if it could be said to be there and not just in Paris, then in the 1920s or so, Ernest Hemingway, in The Sun Also Rises, with his novel, he examines the lost generation in Paris, where the epicenter was. And here his character is flowing around with all these people, and it's just so fucking horrible. And the entire thing, it's just so bitter. And the book begins on a bitter takedown of Robert Cohen, where, like, he straight up, like, Robert Cohen is like a Jewish boxer, and or was a Jewish boxer, but now he's kind of just drifting around with everyone else. And like you can tell, like, the main character just, he kind of hates this guy, but he's also like kind of friends with him. And so like Robert Cohen is a character along with all these others who comes off as himself, because the main character certainly isn't being charitable to him. He comes across as himself very contemptible and very ugly and very materialistic and very hedonistic and not caring anything at all about anybody or anything. And here Jake Barnes is, and he actually does care maybe more than the pack. He's sort of been drifting in and out of their group, but you can tell that like maybe he kind of cares throughout the novel. And so here he is, and perhaps he kind of represents Ernest Hemingway's criticisms of the whole time period. And perhaps Hemingway hated Zelda Fitzgerald. I imagine he would, based on what I've read of his writings and stuff like that. He probably fucking hated Zelda Fitzgerald. Check out, by the way, The Garden of Eden by Ernest Hemingway to see, as my one of my English teachers in high school put it, a man and a wife turn into like the opposite genders. Very strange, and it's a really beautiful novel in the Hemingway way. But it's, I don't know if it's as good as The Sun Also Rises, maybe, but it's worth reading and very interesting for the propaganda level. Even back then, guys, even the Garden of Eden, perhaps somebody is more like Lilith, or, Adam, the original man, who is supposedly man and woman, and in some occult understandings of it, as I've seen in perhaps Cutting Through by Alan Watt. Check it out, one of the most eye-opening books you will ever read. In any case, to go back to The Sun Also Rises, in that book, it ends with Jake Barnes basically drifting to a close, Michael Clayton style. Not to spoil anything about Michael Clayton, but check out the trailer and then watch the movie. If you such a good movie. Michael Clayton and The American both featuring George Clooney. Great movies to watch. That'd be a great movie night. It came out around the same time as each other, very very similar. Anyway, The Sun Also Rises. It about ends with Jake Barnes kind of taking the reins of his life, and you see him like diving into this beautiful like fucking ocean or swimming pool in a very sort of masculine Hemingwayan way, Hemingway-esque way. The Ernest Hemingway of B-boy poems. They can never take the pen away. I'm Leroy Jones. That's Black Thought from The Roots. But anyway, or is it? It is, I think. Anyway, Ernest Hemingway's character here, Jake Barnes, and perhaps he's sort of a stand-in for how Hemingway feels in this society. he's diving into the water. He's like he's almost doing like a self-empowerment trip kind of motivational thing where he's kind of taking control of his life. And then there he is sitting with Brett Ashley as they fucking go on some bullshit fucking ride, some carriage ride through Paris or something. There he is sitting with her, and she says something like, "Isn't it so sad? You know, we could have made a damned fine couple," or something like that. And what does he say? What does Jake Barnes say? He says, "Isn't it pretty to think so?" And we end on a black pill short story. So this short story is going to be another one from my memory banks rather than from something that I read recently. Although check out next episode where I think we're gonna do fucking three new things. Whole new book. Uh, and a couple of short stories, probably one by Joe Abercrombie of the First Law trilogy, grimdark fantasy style stuff, and then one by William Faulkner, who's a very black-pilled writer himself. Okay, so now we are going to talk about a short story by Don DeLillo. And this is a very strange short story because I remember this short story as a scene in Don DeLillo's book Underworld, and yet I see this there are these PDFs of this story online, and apparently they're showing it as a story. So this memorable scene from Underworld, or integrated into it, perhaps like the rabbits thing was integrated into the David Lynch movie Inland Empire. This short story is called Videotape. So it's a very interesting short story, and it was an interesting scene in the book because it's just it comes off like the novel American Psycho, actually, a little bit. It's very sort of removed. It has kind of like a nervous tension underneath the writing, and you're getting a description of this videotape that apparently somebody had taken, a kid had taken through the family car window. And like, but the way it's written, and it's a fairly short story. It's what here it's like 3.5 pages, maybe a little more than that, 5.6. Anyway, whatever. This maybe not. This short story is just telling you. It's narrating this video of like a child kind of taking some home video through the car window on some kind of family car trip, and she's taking a video of a guy in another car, and then that guy ends up getting shot by somebody in another car, and that's the whole story. That really is.